record session. Okay, so now I will share my screen so that I can use my slides that I have carefully prepared. Okay. Alrighty, so welcome to the session. For the next 40 minutes, we will be having this breakout session, the goal of which is to kind of set an agenda for how we can work towards some resources that would help to bring more integration to our part of this community, and also just give us more resources to do our work better. Ooh, what happened? Why is it saying loading? Okay, I don't know why it's saying loading, but this was a slide that I don't know why it's not showing. So it should be a picture, so you can see it here. I wanted to give a shout out to a workshop on Discourse that will be at EMNLP. The due date for submissions is August 15th. Several of the categories of submissions are the kind of resources that we'll be discussing. So as we're talking about it here, we can be aiming to submit to this workshop and participate in this workshop, and possibly even organize, you know, a meetup or something in conjunction with it. I guess it will be a virtual meetup. So we can have a virtual dinner together and talk about, you know, follow-up if we come up with some great ideas. So so that's just giving a shout out to this workshop, which I heard about at yesterday's session. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is have round robin some introductions. And so I had sent around, well, on the little card in Trello, there were some instructions for filling in an introduction slide, and some of you did that, and that's great. If you didn't, you can go ahead and do it now, and then it will be in the slide deck, and you will still get to use the slide when you're introducing yourself. So that will be the first thing, so that we can get a sense of who are we, what are we doing. We're coming even from connections to many different research communities. So please go ahead and say something about yourself and your research, and you know what communities you're representing, and you know maybe what you bring to the table in terms of resources. I was going to give everyone 60 seconds, but I think I'm going to give you 90 seconds, and I'm going to see if that's working out well. I just want it to be orderly, and then we're going to talk. We're going to brainstorm. We may or may not break into breakout sessions. Let's see how many of us there are, and how much of a consensus we sort of have on what type of discussion we'd like to focus on. If we do breakouts, then we'll also come back and report on those, and then we will plot some next steps. So if you have not filled in slides, you'll see, I think slides 3 and 4, or maybe it's 4 and 5 now, give sort of a template, so you can just go on into that slide deck and fill out a couple and stick them at the end. So here's an example. I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Carolyn Rosé. I am a professor of language technologies and human, here, let me time myself so I don't, you know, take too much time. I'm just putting up my, okay, yes. I am a professor of language technologies and human-computer interaction at Carnegie Mellon University. I was actually the SIGDIAL program co-chair for Discourse in 2015. But I am connected a lot with the learning sciences research community. So I have been past president and inaugural fellow of the International Society of Learning Sciences, but I'm also a AAAS Leshner Fellow for Public Engagement with Science and various other things. My focus is on looking at language from a social perspective. So computational sociolinguistics, computational discourse analysis. And I apply these a lot in computer-supported collaborative learning, so for monitoring discussion in real time, looking for conversational processes as evidence that things are going well or poorly, and then using conversational agents to support those processes. So I'm meaning for this slide deck to be a resource that you can go back to, so I encourage you to put in links to things like your website and your papers and whatever, because people might want to look at those going forward. Okay, so moving along, I think somebody new joined us, but that's just fine. We're having introductions now, and you will have a chance to introduce yourself. Please feel free to go and add slides for yourself. The project I wanted to mention for myself is a Discourse DB project. It's an NSF-funded project at Carnegie Mellon, and the idea was to provide data infrastructure for large discourse projects to have kind of generalizable internal representation of discourse that if you that you could use, so that when you do work modeling data from one platform, you could take the same model and easily apply it to data from another platform, because you there would be scripts that import the data into this database, into this generalizable format. And so therefore you wouldn't have to do a lot of adaptation of your scripts or munging of your data in order to be able to test whether a model that, you know, showed some pattern of interest on one corpus would show a similar pattern on a different corpus. So anyhow, I'm happy to talk more with people who are interested in that. And so now, just as a heads up, I did rearrange some of the intro slides. You may be surprised at when you come up in my slide deck. So the next person who should introduce themselves is Smaranda.
Hi, I'm Smaranda Muresan. I'm a research scientist at the Data Science Institute at Columbia University, and also an Amazon Scholar recently. I'm the program chair for SIGDIAL this year, and I'm the Discourse co-chair. And I also recently joined the board member for NACL. My area of interest is argument mining and finding argumentative discourse structure in text, as well as looking at figurative language, understanding, and generation. And also, like similar with Carolyn, I'm also interested in applying this to educational application, as well as some of the public health. And some of the key challenges I want to mention, part of my research, especially related with discourse, is how to basically better understand the connection between discourse structure and argumentation structure, and what is the role of discourse in argument mining. And some aspects we are looking at is, for example, looking at what type of discourse theories, or like rhetorical structure theory, for example, does it, if you can actually get some discourse representation, would that actually help with the downstream task of argument mining and trying to find argument components, claim premises, relation, as well as the inference rules. For example, when you have a support relation, is it a causal reasoning or analogical reasoning or other type of reasoning, and how can discourse maybe help for that? And the other problem, and this is part of one of the challenges, is that for a lot of time when we work with discourse and in argumentation specifically for us, was we don't have large amount of data, and not even medium amount of data. I would say it's an extremely tiny amount of data we have. So how can we actually go and build model? Either they are able to learn from a small amount of data, or how can we cleverly use or build some sort of distance supervision, get some sort of data that exists that might help us in, you know, building the models to detect arguments.
Great. Okay, Michael.
Yeah, Michael is Michael Strube. I lead the NLP group at the Heidelberg Institute for Theoretical Studies. I worked with SIGDIAL for a long time. I think I attended a session at Calling ACL in '98 when people were discussing founding SIGDIAL, and then they came up with a name which I never liked because I'm a discourse person, and SIGDIAL unfortunately has the dial at the second term. I was PC co-chair for SIGDIAL, general co-chair and the like. And I always tried to strengthen the discourse aspect in SIGDIAL. Somehow this didn't quite work out. And this led me to ask a couple of colleagues to start rethinking this thing. And we came up with the workshop, which you mentioned earlier, which will happen at NLP this year, and which is dedicated to discourse. So discourse is marginalized in SIGDIAL, And we tried hard to bring it into Sigdal. Some of you also did. Carolyn did it, Smaranda did it, other people did it. Somehow it never worked very well. And I have the feeling there's no community for discourse. And so one idea of this workshop is to try to get together people so that we can form a community. And this is also important because in the last couple of years, we had a couple of workshops on co-reference, on rhetorical relations, on aspects of discourse, but people didn't talk to each other anymore. And so they, some people started organizing workshops, spent a lot of time to organize workshops, but no one talked to each other anymore. So we try to bring this together again. And so I do not attend Sigdal anymore because I don't think that it makes sense for me. So I'm kind of hijacking this now. And the idea is to get people together and maybe divorce discourse and dialogue and create in the long run a special interest group on discourse in ACL. This we would have wanted to talk about at this workshop. Unfortunately, it's virtual now, and it's going to be much more difficult to get this community thing. Okay, and then I work on discourse and a couple of applications in discourse, and I'm mainly interested in combining linguistic insights with state-of-the-art machine learning. I'm not interested in end-to-end machine learning because I don't think that we can learn anything from this. Okay, that's it.
Very interesting. Yeah, so I'll be interested to hear what ends up happening with the workshop. I agree. It's harder to have a discussion about a divorce over online. Have to see how that goes. But I would be really excited to see more of a presence of computational discourse analysis as a noticeable subcommunity. Not so marginalized, fragmented. So let's see how that goes. I'd be really excited about that. Okay, Chip, you are next. We can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I know I was muted. I was just having trouble unmuting myself. So here I am, and thanks for inviting me, Carolyn. I'm a little, this is a new community for me in a way. I have a lot of related interests over my career. I started out in theater actually in college, so I was interested in dialogue as an art form at the beginning, and then I spent after college I spent 10 years out in Hong Kong teaching English as a second language, and I did a degree in a master's degree in linguistics. So that's where I first got interested in language from a scientific point of view. And when I came back to the States, I did another degree working with Catherine Snow at Harvard Ed School. And after that, worked at, got involved at the Educational Technologies Group at BBNN, where I met Alan Collins and a bunch of other interesting people. And from there, I got interested in I got involved in the school reform movement. We developed a school reform model at BBN. And I spent 10, 12 years in classrooms. And so at that point, I got real interested in classroom discourse, what goes on in classrooms, what people talk about, how they talk or how they don't talk. And that remains an important interest of mine. More recently, I moved to by the way, if you could go back to the other slide. More recently, I moved to the University of University of Memphis, and at first did some school reform stuff there, but then got attracted to the Institute for Intelligent Systems and started working with Art Grazer and Vasile and some other people And there my focus has been on human tutoring. Recently I got, and now just in the last 2 or 3 years, I got real interested in sort of the origins of discourse in human evolution and the relationship between language, teaching, and discourse. And I recently finished a book about that, which I've been working on the proofs just this afternoon. But that's coming out, so a little plug for that. And that's really my sort of theoretical interest. And practically, I'm interested in dialogue and identifying dialogue moves and this is, and I should mention a little bit about Learner Data Institute, which is an NSF-funded project that we've been working on. And that the Institute is largely concerned with learner data generated by adaptive instructional systems or tutoring systems. And so it's like keystroke data. There's not a lot of discourse, but a small group of us, and Art Grazer is among us, and Vasily to a certain degree, are trying to carve out a space within the Institute where our focus is on learning through discourse and looking at collaborative discourse. And so that's an interest that and that's why we invited Carolyn to come and join us. So we're trying to sort of expand that group. The slides you're looking at here, I just want to mention this is a potential resource. This is you won't be able to see it very well, but there are 2 screenshots here. One of them is a screenshot from a tool that we developed for annotating tutoring transcripts. And we use this to, with a large set of transcripts. I think we did 2 projects related, but one we annotated 1,500 transcripts, training human annotators to annotate the transcripts, and then using that for some machine learning stuff. And that tool is actually a pretty good tool, and it's something I'd be happy to talk about given more time and if it seems relevant. Anyway, thanks again for inviting me, Carolyn.
Great. Okay, so we have to move on for now, but thank you, Chip. So Luke Breitfeller, you are next.
Okay, hello. My name is Luke Breitfeller. I am a PhD student working with Carolyn. I'm from the Department of Language Technologies at CMU. I am also working with my directed research is with an NIH research team doing various kinds of analysis on their medical texts and databases. I'm personally very interested in studying how human beings use narrative structure to convey information, how we can actually extract information in that sort of more free-form narrative. It sounds like it doesn't really make sense for medical data, but it actually kind of does. Next slide, please. So the current project I'm focusing on is building a semantic framework to perform temporal reasoning. This is based on observations that human beings use a lot of narrative storytelling, even in very structured data. So even medical text, there is still a lot of descriptions of how patient symptoms have progressed, and that uses narrative. So we basically want to extract the kinds of explicit indicators of time. So things like 5 years ago, over the past 2 weeks, things like that, and use that to build a framework for temporal reasoning. So the project uses grammatical parsing because, well, I might be at 90 seconds. There's stuff with parsing rules and heuristics, and we're kind of trying to fit it into existing models because the semantic is useful. Okay.
Okay, Ritam.
I'm Ritam. I'm a first-year PhD student at LTI CMU, advised by Professor Rosé. Most of my research involves applications of NLP and machine learning for some social good applications. Next slide, please. And the current research project that I'm working on is analyzing difficult conversations in general. So we are tackling this from a linguistic perspective by centering around face acts, which are grounded in the politeness theory of Brown and Levinson. We have developed a generalized framework as well as computational models to identify such face acts in different forms of conversation. And also using these computational models, we are able to generalize or rather create a latent representation of conversational state and analyze how that evolves over time as a conversation progresses. This enables us to ensure or rather find out how face acts can actually impact the success of a particular conversation. And certain use cases that we have tried and tested this on are persuasion dialogues as well as teacher-student conversations. Next, please.
Okay, oops. All right, James Fiacco, you are on.
There we go. Hi, my name is James Fiacco. I'm a PhD student advised by Carolyn as well. My research focus tends to be on rhetorical structure, transactivity, and kind of neural network interpretation, how it kind of all fits together. If you go to the next slide. So one of the projects that I've been working on is kind of identifying rhetorical moves and steps with neural models, and to kind of try to get a representation of what like authors are intending to or attempting to convey in the writing. The domain that we're doing this on is primarily academic and possibly moving into student writing. But like neural models are notoriously hard to understand. So this is like kind of turned into like follow-up work to actually be able to extract information out of like the black box neural state in order to actually be able to extract interesting information that the model has learned to possibly turn into some sort of essay feedback or other insight about the task that we're training. And this, like we're finding, can be kind of extended into other things other than just rhetorical moves and steps, such as transactivity detection and RST parsing and that kind of thing. And I think that's my time.
Okay, Michael Miller Yoder.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael. I'm also a PhD student working with Carolyn in the Language Technologies Institute. I'm doing a dissertation looking at how people present their own identities and also position identities of other people, looking at social media and also online narrative using computational tools, so NLP and network analysis. Next slide. Just as an example of that, we're doing a project with fan fiction. So this is a narrative, online narrative written by fans of original stories. So what's interesting about fan fiction, one of the things is that people are transforming this original narrative with its own characters and settings into their own work. And also, if we think about identity, lots of interesting things going around gender and sexuality. So most relationships, character relationships in fan fiction are queer relationships, whereas in original stories, they're straight relationships. So we first developed a set of tools for getting at characters and also quotes, things that they do and say in fan fiction story text. And then we did a variety of methods to embed and then plot how those relationships actually differ from that original narrative, so we can see that at a large scale. So we were finding that actually authors, or there was some evidence for authors putting emotional language around relationships that were changed from the original story. One finding from that work.
Okay, Chinlan Shen.
Hi, I'm Chinlan Shen. I'm another one of Carolyn's PhD students. And while I work broadly in the area of social media analysis, I'm working on a dissertation that focuses on using tools and technologies from language technologies and NLP to look at social issues involving deployment of abusive language detection and moderation in different online spaces. Yeah, next. So the project that I've been currently working on and thinking about a lot is the impact of, how do we use NLP techniques to evaluate the impact of a very particular form of moderation called quarantines that occur on Reddit. So if you're familiar with Reddit, it's a community where a lot of people interact and discuss issues in these subcommunities called subreddits. And so very recently, there's been a large increase in kind of abusive language on this site. So one of the major issues in determining whether or not how to handle this abusive language issue is figuring out how to strategize about how to handle abusive language at a subcommunity level rather than just outright banning activity at this forum. So, so one of the forms of moderation that people have been exploring on Reddit is this use of quarantines, which are kind of a soft form of moderation that allow users to still continue participation on these original communities, but with certain limitations, like the community is harder to access and less visible to the regular public. And there are a lot of folk theories about how these quarantines actively impact participation on these quarantine subreddits and also the broader Reddit community. Often, whether or not these quarantines are effective in suppressing the abuse that occurs in these communities or they're spread across the site. So the project we're looking at is how do we develop techniques to measure the impacts of these quarantines on these affected subreddits versus what happens in the broader Reddit community as a whole. So what we've been focusing on recently is kind of the idea of trying to identify stylistic norms within different subcommunities or subreddits on Reddit and seeing how these stylistic norms can evolve in response to events such as a quarantine. And currently what we're focusing on right now is evaluating the impactability of the common state-of-the-art representation learning-based techniques that you see everywhere in NLP nowadays on whether or not they can effectively capture these kinds of stylistic norms and portrayals. Yeah.
Okay, Sopan.
Hi, everyone. This is Sopan here. I'm also a student at LTI, a master's student advised by Professor Carolyn. My interests lie basically in modeling long-term context and structure in conversations and using knowledge for language grounding. Next slide, please.
Oh.
Oops.
Is this yours? Yeah.
Yeah. So one of my recent explorations has been on extracting information from doctor-patient dialogue, where doctors try to provide solutions to patients' concerns. Now, as both speakers have a shared model of the goals of the interaction, they often imply important details rather than making them explicit. And due to the asymmetry in terms of their expertise and knowledge, they contribute to different parts of the conversation unequally. For example, patients provide details about their symptoms, whereas the doctor is more focused on recognizing the underlying issue and prescribing solutions. The project specifically intends to use discourse information and speaker-specific context modeling to learn better representations and tackle these complexities. We also try to incorporate domain information using a medical knowledge graph. One of the challenges in providing domain knowledge is the use of informal language by both speakers while discussing medical concepts in these dialogues, which makes it hard for off-the-shelf entity linking models to map them from utterances to medical knowledge bases.
Okay. Ramesh.
Oh, hi. Sorry about that reordering. I wanted to push mine to the end and it got pushed up. Sorry about that. So hi, everyone. My name is Ramesh and I finished my PhD at University of Southern California, Institute for Creative Technologies, about the end of last year, and have been working as a research scientist at the Intel labs, where I work on multimodal dialogue interaction. So, okay.
Did you have another slide, Ramesh? I can't find your other slide.
Yes, I did have it. And I think it's there in the most recent one there.
I don't see it in here. Would you be able to give your spiel without the slide?
Sure, yes, of course. The two areas which I'm very much interested in is dialogue policy and incrementality. So I'm very interested in working on spoken dialogue systems which are multimodal and are incremental at the same time. So the main question is, how can systems perform incremental understanding in like real-time spoken dialogue systems? And the second topic that I'm very interested in is building real-world spoken dialogue systems for novel domains. Novel domains is very like abstract. Some examples include things like conversational image editing, health behavior intervention spoken dialogue systems, multi-party math learning environment for kids, etc. And specifically for these environments, I'm very interested in annotation of the data, building annotation schemes, and basically understanding or building language understanding models. Thanks.
Hao Gong.
Yes, hello everyone, I'm Hong Kong Bao. I think I have put a photo on it, but it seems missing. Okay, I will introduce myself. And I'm a PhD student at Beijing Normal University, and I'm now visiting Carolyn's group in SMU. I'm very new in the discourse analyze area, that because my former work is basically in the education area. And I'm working on how to understand the discourse process in the collaborative learning context, especially how the students regulate themselves at the emotion and motivation level. Yes, I'm not sure I have the next slide. Yes, yes, okay.
Yeah, I guess Elisa?
Sorry, I was muted. Okay. Hi, my name is Lisa, and I'm a PhD candidate in linguistics at the University of Texas at Austin. And I've kind of coming from the field, field of discourse more so than dialogue. So because I'm about to graduate now, most of my dissertation is focused on the discourse side. So I've looked at how you can use discourse in longer texts, like maybe novels or medical documents, to extract information out of them. And more recently, I've looked at how you can learn discourse in an unsupervised manner. And it turns out that it actually doesn't work out very well. And then most recently, I've kind of been switching over now to dialogue and conversation. And one thing that I've been looking at now is subjective discourse. That is how people perceive these, a lot of these dialogue and discourse acts that we talk about, like intents or dialogue acts. A lot of times we just say, oh, there's just one single ground truth. But a lot of these are ambiguous. And when we're trying to resolve these ambiguities, then that's where the subjectivity will come in.
Great.
So
sorry, go ahead.
Okay, and then because I'm also graduating soon, I'm going to be working in a Bridge AI, and their focus is on clinical conversation data. So conversations between patients and doctors. I noticed a couple of other students also focusing on that. So because I'm somewhat newer to dialogue area, so I'm definitely hoping to connect to all of you guys working in that space.
Yeah, we collaborate with the Bridge also. So yeah, I guess
Perfect.
working with you then, that'll be great. I'm just just know Shivdev and Sundeep, and I'll be talking to them tomorrow. So
perfect.
That's great. So welcome to the team. Okay, so that might be everyone that I can see without restarting this. So who did we miss? Okay, so, okay. All right, well, yeah, sorry that I didn't get the updated slides from some of you. Min Xu.
Hi, I'm Min Xu, and I'm a PhD pre-candidate in computer science and engineering department from University of Michigan. And I come from the speech background, and I work with human-to-human conversation data. And we try to understand the emotional expressions and the mental cognitive process and try to find both acoustic and the textual signals. So we used to process each conversation with the same process, but now we start to think that emotion expression is different under different circumstances. So for example, say I'm angry, but when I am seeking emotional support with someone I feel very close to, or when I'm talking to a colleague, it's like the expression is very different. So we want to build systems that understand the intentions in different conversations and try to better understand emotions with those understanding of intentions. But I find it's quite hard to do so because the annotation is going to be hard to obtain, and it's also not clear to me what to annotate. Like there are different levels and different aspects of intentions. It's very unclear to me. So I'm here to look for like ideas to help me ground those thoughts. Thanks.
Okay, all right, so I think that's all the slides we have. Has anyone not introduced themselves? Oh, Vasil, you haven't introduced yourself. Do you want to say a couple of words about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry, I didn't prepare any slides. I only decided to join very late. But Chip, in a way, gave you an overview of what we are doing here in Memphis. So I'm Vasil Rus. I've been working on dialogue-based intelligent tutoring systems for about 15 years, and also on some kind of discourse for learning related tasks. I'm leading this Learner Data Institute right now, which is funded by NSF, and we are interested in discourse and dialogue, in particular in learning contexts. That's one of the reasons I'm here. And Carolyn is one of our newer collaborators and future collaborators as part of the Learner Data Institute. So I'm here to learn and provide any input that could be useful.
Okay, so I think the next thing that we can do, now that we're sort of all acquainted, we see sort of a space of interests here. One thing that's interesting is I think that there may not be a consensus on what the boundaries between discourse and dialogue are. And I think a lot of us are kind of on the frontier where we're looking at conversation, but we're not building dialogue systems per se, though we might also do that, but we're really analyzing the discourse of the conversation. And whereas other people believe that discourse is really about what appears to be non-interactive, though some might argue that even a novel is interactive. So we can definitely have some discussion about that. I think what would be good to do with the remainder of the time that we have is decide what steps can we take towards building some resources together. You all have the link here. I will repaste it just in case you can't see it if you joined later. This is to the slide deck, which will be a continuing resource. So if your final slides didn't get displayed, at least we'll all be able to access each other's slides as a way of remembering who was here and part of this conversation. So in terms of resources, one of the continuing themes that I heard as people were talking was the idea that annotated resources are small in our area because the work that we do in discourse is very time consuming. And so we usually have a small amount of annotated data. Like some people have mentioned being interested in rhetorical structure theory. There's a public corpus for rhetorical structure theory, but it's very small related to the complexity of what's being learned there. So one question could be, as a community, how can we work together towards resources that are shareable and would support our work more generally? Because in addition to the fact that we all have this problem, there are also very many differences about the questions that we're addressing. So one of the last speakers was talking about intents. So how do you define an intent? Well, in some ways, we're all very interested in the intent behind a piece of text that had been authored, but what does that mean? And so we may have 10 different definitions of what that might mean. And so if we create an annotated corpus, which would take a very long time, first to develop a reliable coding scheme, then to do the annotation, would that coding scheme be useful? So when SIGDIAL as a community was getting started, one of the first efforts was to develop the Damsel coding scheme, which was meant to be a shareable representation of how conversation works. And there was a Damsel coding scheme that was kind of accepted by the community as something that would be a starting place and that people would adapt for their purposes. But in the end, you won't see a lot of reference to Damsel anymore. And I think the reason is because the modifications ended up being bigger than the parts that were retained over time. And so that's a challenge. So let's see. And I see that Michel has his hand up. So let me turn it over to him. I'm sure he has an opinion about this. Yes.
I have one. So I attended these meetings when Damsel was created, but this was not only Damsel, it was 2 or 3 schemes, and one was a reference annotation scheme. So there was, to me, proper discourse worked as well back then. Damsel was more dialogue act, and dialogue act is dialogue.
Really? Okay, so you would draw the line in a different place than me, because to me, dialogue is dialogue systems and discourse is analysis of some language that has already happened, whether it was written or spoken, whether there was more than one person there, but obviously we have a difference of opinion about that. Proper discourse.
I think discourse for me is more like text, monologue.
So would you disagree with the idea that even a narrative is conversational in the sense that there's an interaction between the reader and the text, and that there's a sense of social positioning that happens when a narrative is written? So an audience is being considered, and so therefore it's not, you know, a static entity that exists on its own. How do you feel about that idea?
Sounds like Foucault to me. I'm fine with it.
You're fine?
Can I make a comment?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so another way to look at it is to look at discourse as more than one sentence, and well, dialogue is more than one sentence, so dialogue could be viewed as a particular form of discourse.
But I definitely agree with that idea, but I think Michel disagrees with that idea. But what I don't understand is how it can be possible to accept the idea that there's an audience that's considered when, say, a narrative or any kind of piece of text is written, and yet it's not the same thing as a turn in a conversation.
Well, so in one sense, yeah, whenever you write something, you assume there is some listener. Of course, the listener cannot react to you, but there is some kind of transaction from the writer, speaker to the listener. It's just that, yeah, it's not a live multi-turn interaction.
Let's take academic discourse. And I refer to one of my favorite books, Ken Hyland's Disciplinary Discourses, where he's looking at academic writing from a social perspective. If you think about a research paper, it doesn't look very much like a turn in a conversation, and yet it is part of the conversation. And when you write your paper, you're responding to previously published papers. So again, how is that different from a turn in a
Well, here's another interesting example with news on the web. The author publishes a news article, and then the comments are reaction to it. So there is some kind of, I don't know, response to the article, but of course the author will never respond directly to those comments. So there is, you can argue there is some kind of short dialogue, although it is an extreme form of dialogue, which is somewhere in between, let's say, pure dialogue with multi-turn interactive speakers and a pure story where, yeah, there is no recorded reaction from the listener.
Well, in some journals, there will be a journal article, and then there will be like responses that are published as articles in response. And then sometimes the author of the original article will write a response to those responses. And so even there within that, so I know, Michelle, you had your hand up, yes?
Yeah, so I think it's clearer to me now. The dividing line is between written or writing and speaking. And both of you mentioned a writing, like a written paper, or this is discourse. Spoken language, I don't know. And Damsel was targeted towards spoken dialogue.
It's true. It was okay. So let me give you another example. So chat. What about chat? It's not spoken.
Chat is written.
So does that count as discourse?
And if it is multiple sentences and the like, yeah.
Then yes.
But the difference, there are big differences between spoken language and written language in terms of spontaneity and the like. Errors, and whatever.
So is Twitter dialogue?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I don't work with Twitter usually. I don't like it.
So, okay, here's the reason why I'm pushing on this, and that is that in the educational discourse community, there's a lot of work on analysis of kinds of moves that happen within academic discussions, which could be online discussions. So they might look a lot like a discussion forum. It might be chat. It could even be on a wiki. So it might be like talk pages in Wikipedia, or just using a media wiki in a class, and then there's some back and forth discussion behind a page that people are collaboratively discussing. So then something that's an area of discourse for learning is identifying the kinds of moves that people make that make the process more productive for, coming to a good write-up, or also more productive for students learning. And so we try to connect ways of analyzing relationships between turns or parts within turns that show something of cognitive or social processes that are valuable for an outcome. Now, we've developed many of these kinds of schemes, and we've analyzed them in data that it seems like it meets your definition of discourse. But then an interesting question that we might want to answer is, if you switch the modality, but you do the same analysis, do you find the same results? So does the modality switch actually change the relationship between the language patterns and the outcomes? Now, according to you, I can take the same analysis approach, and now that I'm applying it to data that just happened to be spoken, it's no longer discourse. It was discourse, but now it's dialogue. So does it still make a strong distinction in your mind, Michelle, between discourse and dialogue? And the reason why I'm pushing you is because you're going to have this workshop, and I'm asking myself, so what from the work that we discussed here belongs at a workshop like this?
I'd say it's a borderline. So there may be there may be stuff on the border between discourse and dialogue. We can't quite separate the things all the time. But I'd be more interested in a SIGDIAL which cares for text processing too. And with your kind of work, you can go to SIGDIAL and people kind of understand what you're doing. If I come with an evaluation metric on co-reference solution, people don't understand what you talk about. They are not interested in this. And I want to have space for this kind of work too.
I see.
We should. Yeah, I agree.
But if you talk about a divorce, then isn't that a little like where then people might get lost if they join this new community? Then some of their work isn't of interest.
And
Smaranda was going to say something.
Well, I mean, I just want to say that we shouldn't think about, I think we should still try to see, I mean, I know we all tried very hard to bring the discourse part of the SIGDIAL, I think, and we still should push it. I mean, one of the things I think that kind of connects the two, the text, like, you know, when I work on argumentation, right? So you can do it in a student essay, but the same thing is actually, you can argue online. It's almost the same moves. And so I think it's like, you know, if I agree with Mikael, like, it's like basically doing the text-based kind of conversations probably should be part of and are part of the discourse. And we should, and right now the keynote speaker is Diana Litman, who does exactly the argumentation and discourse. So, you know, we should actually have this, through this type of maybe, you know, keynote and try to push back the community, and Carolyn being here and like, you know, I think kind of bringing these more people in.
SIGDIAL always tried to get invited speakers doing discourse, but people didn't submit to SIGDIAL. I don't know how it is this year, but it didn't work.
Yeah,
it didn't work when I was program co-chair either. It was actually really, I felt so bad when that was over. I was like, I failed to get more discourse people. So where are the discourse people like you, Michelle? Where are the people who are doing co-reference? Because I always tell my students, and several of them are here, if we could make a breakthrough in co-reference, it would affect every area of language technologies. But I have not seen a major breakthrough in co-reference in, you know, over a decade at least. You know, I've seen in every paradigm of machine learning, people have tried again to reinvent what, you know, we've been doing since whenever. And so I'm very sorry if I've missed something, and I certainly don't mean to belittle anybody's work. I would be so happy to find out that there's been breakthroughs that I don't know about, but where are these people? Where are the people besides you who are working on this?
They publish at ACL like we do.
Yeah.
But I need an outlet for work for first-year students. I need an outlet for corporate work, for evaluation metrics, for minor ideas, for short papers. And this I don't have. And I don't have a community to talk about these things.
Oh, so what you're saying is that, like, well, ACL would be fine, except it has to be more finished. And so there isn't a path in ACL.
And
they won't take it until it's like out of the park. Is that what you're saying?
In the last 2 years, there were 2 breakthrough papers in co-reference at ACL's EMLPs, whatever. So there was quite an advancement. But this is ACL. And that's not discussed at SIGDIAL.
Yeah. I was actually thinking exactly that, like, you know, we tried very hard to like reach out, and then one of the things that SIGDIAL wanted to do in a way is to do a special session, but the special session ended up being, you know, we have it, but we didn't have discourse. I really wanted to push to have at least a special session that will actually be kind of people like now late breaking results or something like that, kind of to create the community. And in the end, we didn't end up a submission. Like we did have dialogue, but we didn't really have discourse.
So one thing I recall hearing when I was program co-chair, some people said they didn't feel like their papers got reviewed fairly. So like people who might do work in co-reference might have submitted and then didn't get their papers accepted because they didn't get reasonable reviews. Is that still the feeling? That there aren't enough people on the program committee, that people who do work in that area would submit to SIGDIAL because they're worried?
No, so this year, I pushed very hard to have a lot. So I had a lot of discourse people and we end up having less papers submitted. And I had the opposite feeling. I had the senior program chairs telling me, well, I'm not really a dialogue person. It's kind of to do the dialogue. We had actually more dialogue papers. And we did have a lot of like senior program committee. We have Manfred Stede, who was, who is this kind of discourse, and Rebecca Bassono and Annie Louise. Like we did have 3 senior program chairs, but then we also have a lot of program chairs. So I don't think, this year was not that at all. It was just the people submitting the papers.
So what's the answer? So is the answer to all this that what we should just come to this workshop and that's the next step? Or do we need to also have some additional next steps that would be supportive of the workshop effort?
So when we started talking about the workshop, we also started about talking about shared tasks and the like. But then it turned out it was too late to organize this. A shared task can create some sort of community. And there was a kernel shared task on PDDP parsing. There was a kernel shared task on coreference. And there was quite a lot of work in this area. So if people would come up with this and organize a shared task in the framework of a workshop, this would help a lot.
Mm-hmm. So
and shared tasks also have the advantage that they usually create data, proper evaluation metrics and the like. And this helps to push a field forward.
What kind of shared tasks would be useful? So you mentioned that there were 2 for Connell. What would be a strategic, say, 3rd shared task? Something not already being done that might be organized?
And it should not be a niche topic. So I had a student working on bridging resolution, which is interesting and important, but I would consider this as a niche topic. Should be like something more in the mainstream.
What do people think? What would people propose? Let's just have some, and we should end soon because we're actually over time, but I feel like we haven't quite come to the end of our story arc. Let's just end with brainstorming about a shared task. What do people think would be something that's a broad interest, a discourse topic, not niche, but an important area?
Maybe something in the form of persuasion or persuasion tactics or persuasion strategies, because then you can leverage not just conversations, but also text. I mean, over the past few years, there have been persuasion tactics being detected over text, over social media posts, over conversations. So that's a common theme that can hold across different domains itself.
I wonder, okay, so spinning off of this idea, let's say we took a topic like persuasion, and let's say we had several different corpora. And so what if it spanned the whole gamut between dialogue and the furthest discourse from dialogue? So, but what if there was kind of an underlying similar theoretical foundation for what dialogue moves are that would be analyzed across all of them maybe the goal would be multitask learning across different genres of language. Would that seem, so that I think is so specific, it might be sort of too specific to be of interest. On the other hand, multitask learning or representation sharing or generality across very different data is of interest. But I want to hear, so it looks like Chip and Michelle both have their hands up. Do you guys want to respond?
I don't have my hand up.
Your hand is still up from before. You have to click to put it down. Otherwise, it always looks like you have something to say. Oh, lots of hands up. I'm happy to see this. Finally, we're getting some active discussion. Smaranda, you have your hand up and you haven't said that much. And then we'll go to Chip.
Yeah, so I mean, I think persuasion is really good because it can go, you know, as I mentioned, I think it can be part of like a student essay, persuasive student essay. Then you can which is kind of like more monologue. Then you can go in online discussion and you can go across, and then you have different. If you think about labeling persuasion strategies, you can go very with rhetorical, you know, like just like appeal to logos, pathos, ethos, which is very simple, but then you can have other more specific, you are like a very more specific in a, let's say, negotiation or other type of things. So you might have more specific annotation guidelines. And then people from the argumentation mining community might also come here also to join into kind of these shared tasks. I think it can be broader. And I think especially for the educational application, people have looked a lot in kind of using this in the educational setup as well, for like, you know, student essays and assessing critical thinking and, you know, persuasive strategy on that. So I feel like this could potentially be, but I want also to use from Mika, like to see if that kind of will align with the discourse analysis, because I think it could have been something that we can break down in different type of corpora and have this as a generic. In argument mining, I know when we start brainstorming of the whole fields of, we even had brainstorm of an idea of an unshared untask. Like, you know, you have all of these data sets who actually have argumentation moves, but even, you know, some person is interested in finding this discourse argumentative discourse structure after they were like more higher level pragmatic moves. Some like, so different people were interested in different aspects, but kind of coming on the same data set. And everybody layering annotations on top of the same data set that might.
I like that idea. I like that idea because it really reaches into that idea that discourse is so multifaceted and that everyone brings a kind of different lens. So I really like that. So first Chip and then Ramesh.
Yeah, so my question, and this may seem kind of ignorant, because I'm just new to this community, but I've just looked back at our own personal experience, my own personal experience in our work here at the Institute for Intelligent Systems. So when we, this is related to the slides I showed. So we put together we built a system for annotating online tutoring dialogues. And the system consisted of something on the order of 125 different codes. And we had a 150, 200 page coding manual with examples for all the different codes. And we had a system for doing the tagging. And also, and then with Vasily's help, we built some classifiers. Now, that system worked pretty well for that particular purpose, and it reflected really quite a lot of work. Now, but I can imagine that there's probably, what's a good guess, 15, 20, 100 different similar kind of projects done by people with somewhat similar interests, but different. So there's all this sort of scattered work. So what is what kind of work has been or can be done to try to, I don't know, maybe create some kind of library that has a lot of these different, you know, that would bring together the work that we did and the work that other people did. So you have some kind of shared library, and then you could kind of pick and choose and say, yeah, for this particular application, these tags are useful, and yeah, these are good examples, and that you could somehow pull those together into a system for some particular purpose. Now, I'm sure you probably already tried to do this, but you know, that's
a few different efforts like that. So I know of a few different efforts like that. So one thing maybe we can do in response to this, I think I'm going to send out some emails and maybe have people contribute to some lists that we'll construct offline. There have been some efforts to do kind of surveys of different coding manuals for looking at similar kinds of, say, usually in at least what I'm familiar with, conversational processes. I think what I have seen though is that people have tried to do these things and then they get ignored in the end. And it comes back to this idea that I recall Ken Kadinger making about theories. He says, theories are like toothbrushes. Everyone has one and no one wants to use anyone else's. And I think coding schemes are a little bit like that too. You know, it's like, it's yours and you want your own. So, but anyhow, I'll send you a list of efforts where people have kind of collected together things because I've seen that. So I know Ramesh had his hand up. Ramesh, did you want to join in?
No, just in support of what Michelle had to say about the task of co-reference resolution, for instance, because it's something which kept coming up in the dialogue systems that we try to design, and every time we try to tackle it, it was kind of, like became something, which was kind of pushed back all the time. Like, for instance, because, like it was not shown a lot of interest, even though it's so important to solve. So the shared task is something which looks extremely interesting and definitely very exciting. I mean, all up for it. So if any help's needed or anything, like I'd be more than happy to lend a hand. But yeah.
Yeah. Actually, now that you mentioned that, maybe that's the ideal shared task, co-reference in a conversation, because co-reference is obviously a task that's of extreme interest on the discourse side. And yet all of the resources I know of for building models for co-reference are all for kind of expository narrative kinds of text, mostly newspapers. And the best models do terrible when you try to apply them to conversational data. And yet, when we're working in conversational data, we do need co-reference. It's just, we try and it doesn't work. And so a lot of the cues, the kinds of cues that are most valuable in say, non-interactive text for co-reference just are missing in conversation because we don't have a lot of complex syntactic constructions, or not as many. And so this idea of using structure to make something salient doesn't happen as much in a conversation. And also the organization of the conversation is often less about the structure of the information that's being communicated and more about the structure of the underlying task that allows things to be implicit, and therefore means that unless you have some knowledge external to the conversation that you see, it's very difficult to know what that underlying structure that lends coherence and allows people to do the reference resolution actually is. So I wonder, and now I'm going to pass this back to Michelle, who's kind of taking the lead on representing discourse as opposed to dialogue. What do you think? Because maybe this would be the task that would bring communities together.
I worked on and off on this topic. It's incredibly difficult and frustrating. Like I started working on this in 2000. I worked on it in 2003 at a PhD student doing his thesis on co-reference in dialogue. It's super difficult.
Yeah, it's super difficult, but it's super important. So the fact that it's, and I, totally know what you're saying about super difficult, frustrating. Do you think that makes it a bad shared task?
It makes it a good shared task because it would bring people together and maybe advance the state of the art. And in this area, you actually can advance the state of the art. If you do a shared task on the OntoNodes data, then it's difficult to beat some word-based whatever system, because it just memorizes everything. And if you have a good set of annotated data in this area, which no one has, then one could pull this off.
So maybe that is what we should do. Maybe then we don't have to get a divorce. Maybe we can save marriage.
That's the right attitude. I like that, and I think we can bring. Then I think like we have to brainstorm a bit of what type of data sets we're gonna put for this, because we want Coref to be, let's say, the underlying task for this. But then on top of it, if you think about a broader, longer term, then you can do a layer annotation, and then it's gonna be also for an end task that you might want to do, like persuasion, I don't know, something like that. So maybe like choosing the right underlining collection that we're gonna end up doing annotations, shared task, or something that would be.
We have annotated data for coreference and dialogue.
Is it big enough?
I don't think so. But it's from 2006-07 maybe. It's based on the ICSI meeting corpus.
Okay. Well, but what you must have is annotation tools and the coding manual, right?
Of course, we have an annotation tool.
But what I'm saying is, like, you already have the infrastructure for doing a bigger annotation effort, and what we would just need to do is train annotators and decide on the data, and then we would basically have what we would need for a shared task, right?
Yeah.
So I love that idea. Why don't we, so maybe what we need to do is decide on, say, a subcommittee of people who want to put together this shared task. And that can be our successful outcome of today's session. I would be happy to be part of this. So put me down. Let me see. So let me write this down. I'm so happy we actually have like an outcome. Okay.
Michelle, I had a question regarding the data set. So would you be able to provide some links to that data set if it is public? This is Sopan here.
Yeah, so I'm afraid that the data set can be obtained only through the LDC. But the annotations we did on top of it, of course, we can share.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful.
So Michelle, can I count on you to be part of this committee?
I'm part of like one or the other committee, so one more doesn't really.
Great, because you have a lot of resources that we would need for this. So let me put you down. Okay. Do we have one more volunteer out in the studio audience? Ramesh, can we count on you?
Yes, I wanted to ask Michelle for the coding manual, because we had a paper that we presented today morning, where it's kind of a visual map game. So we had so much of co-reference, throughout the data set, and we wanted to go ahead and do the annotation, and we probably will go ahead and do the annotation, and we are taking a look at this as a subtask. There is part of the data set which we could definitely release and share. But yeah, I mean, like there are others involved for sure. But yeah, I mean, this is something very interesting and very relevant. So all up for it.
Perfect.
Please send me an email.
Yes.
And I think we are going to collect this in general somehow anyways. But send me an email and I'll try to pull this out.
Perfect.
And then I think also in part of the shared task, maybe we can think it isn't longer term. So maybe now, because we already have a data set, we can start, let's say, in 1 year on this data set and maybe another. Then you can do it like this kind of domain adaptation type things. You can move towards something else where you have, maybe a little bit more annotated on that and then try to do. So I think we can do it that way.
Yeah, so the idea with the share task came up when we started to discuss about the workshop last year. Then it was too late.
Yeah.
So in some sense, if we would start talking about this now, then this would be something for the second iteration of the workshop,
Yeah,
which we do not plan yet.
But well, it can be, I think the shared task can be, yeah, we can try, you know, I think it's ideally the workshop, but you know, we can do something. Yeah.
I don't think we're going to be ready by the workshop. So the workshop is in November. I don't think we can pull it off by November, but maybe we could. Well, no, because we might have the corpus all together by November, a big enough one. But then, but you have to, you know, get people to sign up, and then they have to actually do it.
Yeah.
Maybe we can introduce the task at the workshop.
That's why I say this would be something for the second iteration of the workshop, which we do not plan yet.
Now you're committed.
Well, we can do it as a, you know, like what, why don't we, like, I don't know what's the deal with the SIG, I mean, you can do it at the workshop, but you can do it as a SIG dial and submit it as a, something special session or something people can go and really submit it and do it. And then that's all we do, kind of, if we want to reach out to this community back.
Yeah.
Then you
cannot, you're right. Maybe that makes more sense.
No, but
then you cannot count on me because I boycott a SIG dial.
Okay, okay.
You're here now. So, okay, well, all right then. Thank you all for attending this session. I think it was a really lively discussion. I think that we managed to bring several communities together to share. And I think it would be great if people would make sure that their slides, had their contact information, because then this can be a continuing resource for this group. And of course, we'll be announcing, so I think the small group of us will have some separate discussions about how to get this shared task off the ground. And so you'll be hearing from us. And I hope everybody around this table will participate in that when the time comes. So thank you all for joining in. And
thanks for organizing, Carolyn. It was great. Thanks.
Especially the Europeans who had to stay up late. Claps all around. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.